On a Tuesday, on February the 4th, some of us were here and we left. Mark McGuinness, if I recall properly, was with us because we didn't hold meetings in our own offices because of the security. And we walked down to Conway Mill. Now, this was a small terraced house. It's actually a Dundurn Inn. There was a doctor's surgery used to be here at the corner. There had been a video shop. There was an old second-hand furniture shop. But 55 Falls Road housed our advice centre downstairs and our prisoner of war office and our press office upstairs. And I see many people here who used to work in the office or who were in and out of the office, and it was very small and very claustrophobic. And as you walked in, there was a little reception area on the left, and behind it was the advice centre. And Paddy Loughran was a very popular, very well known. He lived around in Clonard Street, round the corner, and Paddy was on the door. And an RUC officer, Alan Moore, came to the door, said he was a journalist and he had an appointment, and Paddy asked him to wait while Paddy buzzed up to the press office. And RUC officer Moore was armed with a shotgun which he had in a bag. And apart from Paddy, Pat Wilson and Michael O'Dwyer were in the small reception room, and Michael was there with his son. He's here with us today, Michael Oak. He was only 2-year-old at that time when he was sitting on his daddy's knee on the bench. And in the room behind was Pat McBride and Nora Larkin. And RUC officer Moore pulled out his weapon. Paddy Loughran shouted a warning. The shots rang out. And then, as the RUC officer left the building, he was grabbed by Marguerite Gallagher, who is here today, one of our heroines. And Marguerite grabbed hold of him, and she was dragged around the corner until he pushed her off, jumped into his car, which was parked in Sebastopol Street, and he drove off. Now, one of the first back into the room was Richard McCauley. Richard was to be at the meeting with us, but those of you who know Richard, he's always late. He's never early, and he was late that day. And he left here, met Fra Fox, a late Fra Fox, and they walked down to Conway Mill. And just as they got to Conway Mill, they got word that there was a shooting at the office, and they dashed back. And he arrived here just as the paramedics were carrying Pat McBride out. And he leaned over and he told Pat to stay strong. And then Richard, went into the reception office. And Paddy Loughran lay dead on the floor. Michael O'Dwyer was still sitting on the bench. And young Michael was taken out of his father's arms and brought upstairs. And Nora Larkin was taken away also by ambulance. And Pat Wilson, who was grievously wounded, but he was still conscious, was sitting on the floor with his back to a bench. And Richard and Louise from the POW office knelt beside him and tried to reassure him. And then more paramedics arrived. And Richard and Louise went back to work in their offices because they were determined not to be intimidated. I'm sure they were traumatized, but they were determined not to be intimidated by the killing of their friends. And young Michael had to be got to his mother. She's here today with us as well. And that was the second tragedy to touch the O'Dwyer family, because Michael's mother, Sadie, had been killed in a UBF bomb attack in North Belfast in 1976. And it often strikes me just how some families have multiple tragedies visited upon them. Meanwhile, we dashed up from Conway Mill, and when we got here there was an altercation between the RUC. They had arrived, they were trying to force their way into the building, and there was just where the door was behind me and Fra, there was a whole melee going on, and they were also trying to close the building. And later on, incidentally, and this is quite a common occurrence, when some of our people went to clean up the reception room, they discovered shotgun cartridges and they discovered the bag in which RUC officer Moore had carried his shotgun. Mysteriously, the RUC in the forensic search missed a bag and missed the shotgun cartridges. And later we learned that RUC officer Moore drove to the shores of Loch Ness where he shot himself. And I was saying to myself, I was saying to a friend of mine on the phone last night, it's a pity for him. Well, he came here and did that and then he went and took his own life. And the person I was talking to said, well, it's not him, it's whoever wound him up to do that. It's whoever wound him up to come and attack people in a political party office. And that wasn't the first attack on this office. It was bombed. RPG rockets were fired into one of the upstairs rooms. Connolly House was also attacked a number of times. Some comrades were wounded up there, some activists and advice workers, and other attacks on the offices in the New Lodge, in Ardoyne, in Dublin, in Monaghan and other places. And all during this period, 20 members of Sinn Féin, as well as family members, wives, sons, brothers, were killed, mostly by unionist paramilitaries in collusion with British state forces. And what this was all about was trying to terrorise this community and trying to push Sinn Féin to acquiesce to the supremacist attitude that was there at that time. It was about pacification. It was a very clearly part of the British Army's counterinsurgency strategy. I'm delighted that those of us who survived all of this are here. And we didn't acquiesce, we didn't bend the knee, we stayed with it, and we're going to stay with it until we get to the end of the road that we're on. The following afternoon, 2 UDA members entered Sean Graham's bookmaker's shop on the Armour Road and killed 5 customers and wounded 9 others. The youngest to die was a 15-year-old schoolboy, James Kennedy. The eldest, a 67-year-old father of 3, Jack Duffin, along with Christy Doherty, William McManus and 18-year-old Peter McGee. And the relatives for justice later exposed the extent of the collusion between the RUC and the loyalists who took part in this attack. The handgun was allegedly stolen from a UDR base by a UDA killer, Ken Barrett, who gave it to UDA quartermaster William Stobie. And both of these men were agents working for the RUC Special Branch. Barrett went on to kill human rights lawyer Pat Finucane. Stobie also provided the weapons for that. And all of the 9 citizens, including the 3 killed here and those who were wounded, were victims of the policy of collusion. British forces were directly or indirectly responsible for hundreds of deaths. And most recently, the Ombudsman's Office and its reports into killings in North Belfast and I suppose specifically Loughlin Island, and other groups such as Amnesty International have all revealed the extent of state collusion. Now, how do we deal with these issues? It's remarkable that a huge amount of people who have been wounded or who have lost family members, they don't hate. I think it's quite remarkable that people have the grace. I'm not saying that they forgive those who committed these atrocities, but they get on with their lives and they're magnanimous and they're generous. And we appreciate that there can be no hierarchy of victims, and we also appreciate that this story that I'm telling here could be told by others who lost family members because of IRA actions or the actions of others. But what we need to do is to face up to the reality that every single narrative is as legitimate and must be upheld as any other. I obviously disagree completely with the British, with the RUC, with the unionist paramilitaries, but I'm prepared to concede that they too of their story to tell. I don't concede that with their leaders. I don't concede that with this blow-in who we have at the moment, Brokenshire, who had the audacity to say on the anniversary of Bloody Sunday that there was too much of a focus on the activities of British forces. And what this is about is obstructing the truth. It's totally contrary to an agreement that was made between us and others in the two governments 2 years ago into these legacy issues. And they use this ridiculous excuse about national security to close down legacy inquests, and they refuse to fund those inquests. And what they want is immunity for British soldiers and others who were responsible for beatings, for torture, for murder. I read a tweet from Paddy Einstein saying that I'm paraphrasing what he said, he was shocked to hear that some members of the British Army had committed torture, and he was supposed to be an intelligence officer. But of course, many men and women here were beaten unconscious, were subjected to inhuman and degrading treatment. And only a handful of British soldiers were ever convicted of murder, and those who were released early, were taken back into the British Army, and in some cases promoted. But that's not good enough. They want full immunity. They also want to cover up the actions of their agents, of their informers, and of their entire military and paramilitary operation. They don't want people to know who in the British government authorised the torture of the hooded men, or the shoot-to-kill operations, or the waterboarding of prisoners, or the countless other acts of terror they inflicted on citizens here. So I find Brokenshire's intervention to be deeply offensive. And I've met, since the time of Patrick Mayhew, all of the British Secretary of States, and their entire function and focus is to defend British national interest. And they ignore that the assertion he made is totally and absolutely untrue. Any neutral scrutiny of the cases that are ongoing will prove conclusively that this claim by him and by some Tory and Unionist politicians is just not true. We also need to ask the SDLP its position on these issues, because the SDLP are calling on nationalists to transfer their posts to the UUP. And the UUP is very clear. They have said, if they can, that they will block investigations into British state killings. Finally, this nonsense or assertion that in some way the British are neutral is just that. Complete and absolute rubbish. Theobald Wolfe Tone, 200 years ago, said that the connection with England has been the never-failing source of all our political evils. And that is the case today as it was in his time. So, we need to celebrate the lives of our friends, honour them by continuing to ensure that peace and justice prevails, ensuring that the Irish government, for example, fulfils its responsibilities as co-equal guarantors of the Good Friday Agreement. And all of those issues need to be the focus of anyone interested in a lasting peace in this part or across this island that we live in. The people that we speak of here, I knew Pat McBride. He was a local Sinn Féin activist. He had a hard life. He was a good guy. I didn't know Michael O'Dwyer, but from those who did know him, he also was a very decent man, a good husband, a good father. And I knew Paddy Loughren, and I know the Loughren family and the Meehan family well. So these are husbands, brothers, friends, family members, and I want to commend all of their families. Pat Wilson went on to make a recovery. Michael's a big strapping man to this now. Are you single?
Who's asking you?
I'm married, So we need to learn all the time to smile and to face up to all of these difficulties that we have survived in the past. And we need to reiterate in a real way that our task is to build a society based on core values. And insofar as I speak personally about people that I know, people who I work with and joke with and slag with, and people who worked in this room, this office, behind with us, I want to stress that we appreciate that others bore the same difficulties. And what we want to do is to make sure that this never ever happens again. And that means both governments and all the parties facing up to their responsibilities and building an Ireland that will be worthy of the children and the grandchildren of those who lost their lives here and in other places throughout the north. Go to meet them all.